The general said it would take 3 weeks to clear the Netherlands. The Canadians did it in 17 days while feeding a starving nation. But the Dutch weren't celebrating when the convoys first appeared on the horizon. They were hiding in their cellars, terrified, clutching kitchen knives and praying to a god they weren't sure was listening anymore. Because for months, the posters had been explicit about what was coming. The Canadians are not like the British or Americans. They bring savages from the wilderness, men who wear the scalps of their enemies, men who know nothing of civilization. 16-year-old Anna van der Berg believed every word. It was April 1945, and the Netherlands was dying. Not the quick death of artillery or airstrikes, but the slow death of systematic starvation. The hunger winter had the country in a chokehold, and it was squeezing the life out of anyone too weak to resist. The German occupation forces had cut off all food supplies to the western provinces as punishment for Dutch resistance activities. It was collective punishment on a scale that defied comprehension. 22,000 people would die before it ended. Anna's family was among the lucky ones, if you could call it luck. They were still alive, though her 8-year-old brother Peter had stopped growing months ago. His arms looked like sticks wrapped in parchment. Her mother's hair had started falling out in clumps. Anna herself had lost so much weight that her own reflection looked like a stranger, all hollow cheeks and enormous eyes. They were eating tulip bulbs. The famous Dutch tulips that once symbolized wealth and beauty were now the difference between life and death. You had to boil them twice to remove the toxins. The first water you threw away. The second water became soup, if you were generous with definitions. The city of Apeldoorn looked like something from a nightmare. Every tree had been cut down for firewood. People had burned their furniture, then their floorboards, then parts of their houses. The streets were empty, except for the occasional figure shuffling along, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of someone whose body was consuming itself for fuel. And now the Canadians were coming. Anna had seen the propaganda posters plastered on every available wall. The images were designed to terrify. Grotesque caricatures of soldiers with wild eyes and wilder features, carrying weapons that looked more like instruments of torture than military equipment. The text was explicit about what these soldiers would do to Dutch women and children. One poster showed a First Nations soldier rendered in the style of a horror movie monster with the caption, "Is this what you want for your daughters?" The Nazi propaganda machine had been particularly focused on the Indigenous Canadian soldiers. Called them ghost snipers, said they were savages who'd been given uniforms but not civilization, said they scalped their enemies and decorated their rifles with human hair, said they were unstoppable killers who showed no mercy. Anna's mother had tried to maintain perspective. "The Germans have lied about everything else," she'd said, but even her voice shook when she said it, because what if this time the lies were true? The sound came at dawn, a rumble that Anna felt in her chest before she heard it with her ears. Vehicle engines, many of them, the distinctive growl of heavy machinery moving in formation. Anna was at the window, unable to help herself. Around her, neighbors were disappearing into basements and root cellars, pulling shutters closed, becoming invisible. The street emptied in seconds. She should have hidden with them, should have been in the cellar with her mother and Peter. But something kept her there, pressed against the wall beside the window, watching through a crack in the wooden shutters. The first vehicle rounded the corner, and Anna's breath caught in her throat. It was a Sherman tank, massive and brutal-looking, with a white star painted on its turret. The registration numbers were Canadian. Behind it came universal carriers, armored vehicles she'd only seen in German newsreels. Then trucks, dozens of trucks. Then soldiers on foot, walking in tactical formations that spoke of professional military training. They looked exhausted. This wasn't what the posters had promised. These men didn't look like savages eager for violence. They looked like they'd been fighting for years and had years more fighting ahead of them. Their uniforms were caked with mud from a dozen different battlefields. Their faces were drawn and hollow, marked by the kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. The convoy moved with practiced efficiency. Soldiers were dismounting, establishing security positions, clearing buildings. It was textbook urban operations, the kind of discipline that came from months of hard combat experience. And then Anna saw them. 3 soldiers moving together in a fire team formation. Their skin was darker than the others, their features different. First Nation soldiers, the ones from the posters, the ghost snipers, the scalp takers, the monsters. Anna's hand found the knife in her pocket, though she knew it would be useless against trained soldiers with rifles. The 3 men were methodically clearing buildings on the opposite side of the street, moving with a fluid efficiency that spoke of extensive combat experience. One of them was carrying a Lee Enfield rifle with modifications Anna didn't recognize. Another had what looked like a radio strapped to his back. The third was scanning rooftops and windows with the systematic attention of someone who'd learned to survive by noticing everything. They weren't monsters. They were professionals doing a dangerous job. One of them noticed Anna at the window. His eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment, and she froze, waiting for the violence that the posters had promised. He raised his hand. Anna tensed. He waved. Just a simple wave, the kind you'd give a neighbor. Then he said something to his companions and they kept moving, clearing the next building in their sector. The convoy continued for over an hour. More vehicles than Anna had ever seen in one place, more soldiers than she could count. The scale of it was overwhelming, a demonstration of military power that made the German retreat look like the rout it had been. And then something started happening that Anna couldn't process. The soldiers were stopping, opening their packs, pulling out packages and tins, and handing them to civilians who were beginning to emerge from hiding. Anna watched as a Canadian corporal knelt beside a small child, maybe 5 years old, and offered her a chocolate bar. The child's mother grabbed her daughter and pulled her back, terrified. The corporal didn't push. He simply placed the chocolate on the ground, smiled gently, and moved on. After he left, the mother darted forward and snatched it up like a bird grabbing seed. Another soldier was surrounded by a growing group of children who'd gotten braver. He was distributing rations, trying to make sure everyone got something, breaking chocolate bars into equal pieces, opening tins of meat and passing them around. His Dutch was non-existent and their English was worse, but they were communicating through gestures and smiles. A supply truck had stopped in the town square, and soldiers were unloading wooden crates marked with military stenciling, not ammunition. Food. They were setting up a distribution point, organizing the chaos into orderly lines, making sure everyone who needed food could get it. This wasn't looting. This wasn't the rampage the posters had promised. This was organized humanitarian relief conducted with military efficiency. Anna watched a First Nations soldier, one of the supposed ghost snipers, spend 20 minutes helping an elderly man carry firewood to his house. Watched another use his field knife to open a tin of rations for a woman whose hands were shaking too much from hunger to do it herself. Watched a third soldier give his own wool blanket to a mother with an infant, despite the fact that the temperature was barely above freezing. The cognitive dissonance was profound. Everything Anna had been taught, everything the posters had shown her, everything the radio broadcasts had warned about was collapsing in real time. These weren't monsters. These were men who'd brought food to a starving city and were giving it away, despite having little themselves. Anna made a decision. She left her position at the window, grabbed her ration card and stepped outside for the first time in days. Her mother called after her, voice sharp with fear, but Anna kept walking. The distribution point was organized chaos. Hundreds of people were emerging from hiding, drawn by desperation and hope. Canadian soldiers were trying to manage the crowd, calling out instructions in broken Dutch, using hand gestures to create orderly lines. Anna joined the queue. Around her, people were crying, not from fear, but from relief, from disbelief, from the overwhelming realization that they might actually survive. The soldier manning the distribution table was young, maybe 20, with the maple leaf insignia of the Canadian Army clearly visible on his shoulder. He looked at Anna's ration card, looked at her hollow face and skeletal frame, and something in his expression shifted. He gave her double portions, a tin of corned beef, a package of hardtack biscuits, 2 chocolate bars, a small block of cheese. More food than Anna had seen in 6 months. "For family," he said in terrible Dutch, gesturing to indicate she should share it. Anna nodded, unable to speak. She clutched the packages to her chest like they were made of gold and stumbled back toward home, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, the distribution continued. The Canadians had brought enough food to feed the entire city for days, and they were giving it all away. That night, Anna's family ate real food for the first time in months. The corned beef was salty and rich, and so intense that Peter couldn't eat more than a few bites before his shrunken stomach rebelled. The chocolate was impossibly sweet. The cheese was like a memory of a life they'd almost forgotten. Anna's mother cried while she ate. "They saved us," she kept saying. "They actually saved us." The next morning, Anna learned about Operation Manna. The sky filled with Allied bombers, flying so low that you could see the rivets on their fuselages. But they weren't dropping bombs. They were dropping food. Wooden crates attached to parachutes, drifting down like gifts from heaven. Each crate contained emergency rations, enough to keep a family alive for a week. The bombers came in waves: British Lancaster bombers, American B-17 flying fortresses, even some Canadian aircraft. They flew in perfect formation, their bomb bay doors open, releasing cargo instead of ordnance. People flooded into the streets, no longer hiding. They watched the sky and wept. Children ran after the falling crates, laughing for the first time in months. Old men removed their hats and stood in silence, paying respect to the pilots who were risking their lives to feed them. Anna stood in the town square and watched the bombers pass overhead, so low she could see the crew members waving from the windows. She thought about the propaganda posters still plastered on the walls, thought about the months of terror, thought about the knife she'd carried in her pocket, prepared to defend herself from monsters. The monsters never came. Instead came men who shared their rations, who gave away their blankets, who flew unarmed bombers into enemy territory to drop food instead of bombs. It was the greatest act of cognitive dissonance Anna had ever experienced. Over the following days, the Canadian presence in Apeldoorn became normalized. They established a military headquarters in a building the Germans had used as a command post, set up medical aid stations to treat civilians suffering from malnutrition and disease. Organized work details to repair damaged infrastructure, water systems, electrical grids. The soldiers worked alongside Dutch civilians, showing them how to use Canadian equipment, sharing technical knowledge, treating them as partners rather than subjects. There was no arrogance, no sense of conquest, just professional soldiers doing a job that needed to be done. Anna found herself spending time at the medical aid station, helping translate between Dutch patients and English-speaking medics. Her English was limited to what she'd learned in school before the war, but it was enough. The work gave her something to do other than sit in her house and think about how close they'd all come to dying. It was at the aid station that she met Thomas. He was a medical orderly, responsible for maintaining supplies and assisting the doctors. He was also one of the First Nations soldiers, Cree from somewhere called Manitoba. Anna learned this through a combination of broken English, worse Dutch, and elaborate hand gestures. Thomas had kind eyes. That was the first thing Anna noticed. Not the color of his skin or the length of his hair or any of the things the propaganda had told her to fear. Just his eyes, which were tired and sad but fundamentally kind. He caught her staring at him one day and smiled. "Hello," he said, his Dutch accent atrocious. "Hello," Anna replied in English. His smile got bigger. They managed a brief conversation, mostly through gestures, about the work they were doing. He showed her how to properly organize medical supplies. She showed him which Dutch herbs could be used for basic treatments. It was simple, practical, human. Over the following weeks, Anna saw Thomas regularly. He was always working at the aid station, always had a smile or a friendly word, even though their conversations were limited by the language barrier. He taught her English words, food, medicine, home, family. She taught him Dutch words, though his pronunciation made her laugh, which made him laugh, which made everything easier. Other women noticed. They whispered, but not unkindly. The Canadians had saved the Netherlands. They'd brought food when people were eating tulip bulbs and wallpaper paste. They'd been disciplined and respectful when they could have been cruel. If some Dutch girls were developing friendships with some Canadian boys, who could blame them? Anna's mother was cautious but not opposed. "He's a good man," she observed after meeting Thomas. "You can see it in how he treats people." The war was still ongoing. Even though the Netherlands was liberated, the Canadians were consolidating their positions, preparing for final operations into Germany. They would be staying for months. Thomas told Anna, through careful English and hand gestures, about his home. He drew maps in the dirt, showing the vastness of Canada. And Anna couldn't believe a country could be so large. He showed her a photograph of his family, standing in front of a small house on a reserve. They looked happy, normal, like any family anywhere. Anna showed him the photograph she carried of her father, taken before he was sent to a labor camp in Germany. Thomas looked at it seriously, then said something in English that sounded sympathetic. He squeezed her hand gently. The connection between them grew slowly but steadily. It wasn't just gratitude, though that was part of it. It wasn't just loneliness, though that was part of it too. It was something more fundamental, recognition. Two people who'd survived terrible things and were trying to find something human in the ruins. In June, the Canadians organized a celebration for Liberation Day. The war in Europe had ended in May, but the festivities in Apeldoorn had been delayed while the city recovered. Now there was food and music and a reason to celebrate. Thomas asked Anna to attend with him. She said yes. The celebration was held in the town square, the same place where the Canadians had set up their first distribution point. There was music, provided by a Canadian military band playing jazz and swing. There was food, more food than anyone had seen in years. There was dancing and laughter and the sound of people who'd forgotten how to hope, suddenly remembering. Anna danced with Thomas. Neither of them knew the steps, but it didn't matter. They moved together awkwardly, laughing at their own clumsiness. Around them, other couples were doing the same, Dutch civilians and Canadian soldiers mixing in a way that would have been unthinkable months ago. During a slower song, Thomas pulled Anna closer and said something in English. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the meaning. He was telling her he cared about her. "I understand," Anna said in English, her pronunciation careful. Thomas smiled and kissed her gently, like she was something precious. Around them, people were dancing and celebrating and living, but Anna didn't see any of them. There was only Thomas, only this moment. Only the impossible fact that something beautiful was growing from the ruins of everything terrible. Later that night, walking her home, Thomas asked if she would consider coming to Canada when the army returned home. His English was careful, his expression hopeful and terrified. Anna understood what he was offering: a future, a life, a chance to start over in a country she'd never seen, with a man she'd known for only a few months. It should have been an impossible decision. But standing there in the liberated streets of Apeldoorn, looking at the man who represented everything the propaganda had told her to fear and everything she'd actually found instead, the choice was simple. Yes, she said. The process of becoming a war bride was more complex than Anna had imagined. There were forms to fill out, medical examinations to pass, interviews to endure. The Canadian military had established an entire bureaucracy to handle the flood of Dutch women who wanted to marry Canadian soldiers and emigrate. Anna wasn't alone. There were hundreds of them in Apeldoorn alone, thousands across the Netherlands. Dutch women who'd fallen in love with their liberators and were now preparing to follow them across an ocean to an unknown future. They helped each other through the process, sharing information and advice. There was Elise, who was marrying a tank commander from Ontario. There was Margaret, who'd fallen for an infantry sergeant from Nova Scotia. There was Marie, who was engaged to a French Canadian from Quebec and was learning a completely different language. Some families were supportive, others were horrified, especially when the soldier in question was First Nations or of other non-European descent. The Netherlands had been liberated from Nazi occupation, but decades of colonial thinking didn't disappear overnight. Anna's mother faced criticism from neighbors who thought she was allowing her daughter to make a terrible mistake. But Anna's mother had watched Thomas carefully over the months, had seen how he treated Anna, how he treated everyone, had seen the respect and kindness that seemed fundamental to his character. "He's a better man than most of the Dutch boys who came home from the war," she said bluntly to the critics, "and he saved our lives. That counts for something." Anna and Thomas were married in August by a Canadian chaplain in a ceremony that mixed military efficiency with unexpected tenderness. Anna wore a dress borrowed from 3 different neighbors, altered to fit her frame, which was still recovering from months of starvation. Thomas wore his dress uniform, looking nervous and proud. The celebration afterwards was attended by Canadians and Dutch in equal measure. Someone had a violin, someone else had an accordion. The music was a strange hybrid of Canadian folk songs and Dutch traditionals, and it shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. Anna danced with Thomas, with her mother, with Peter, who was finally starting to look like a healthy child again, with Thomas's friends from his medical unit, with old women from the neighborhood who cried happy tears and told her she was brave. Late in the evening, one of Thomas's fellow soldiers, another Cree man named Joseph, pulled Anna aside. "It won't be easy in Canada," he said gently, his English more fluent than Thomas's. "People there have some of the same lies in their heads. The reserve system is its own kind of occupation." "I know," Anna said. She'd thought about it, worried about it. "Talk to Thomas about the racism he'd faced before the war. Thomas is a good man," Joseph continued, "one of the best, but good men can't always protect you from bad systems." "Bad systems didn't kill me here," Anna said. "They won't kill me there either." Joseph smiled. "You're tougher than you look." "I'm Dutch," Anna said simply. "We survive." The convoy of war brides left in September. There were hundreds of them, Dutch women following Canadian soldiers across the ocean. Some were going to cities, some to farms, some to places they couldn't even pronounce. All of them were leaving behind everything they knew for something unknown. Anna's mother and Peter came to see her off. There were tears, but also excitement. Her father had finally come home from the labor camp, thinner but alive. The family would be together again, even if Anna was on the other side of the world. "Write to us," her mother said, holding Anna tight. "Tell us everything." "I will," Anna promised. "Every week." The ship that would take them to Canada was waiting at the port in Rotterdam. It was huge, much bigger than Anna had imagined. Hundreds of war brides were boarding, an international sisterhood of women who'd chosen love over safety. The crossing took 2 weeks. Anna was sick for most of it, the motion of the ship making her stomach rebel. Thomas stayed with her, holding her hair back when she vomited, bringing her small amounts of food, telling her stories about Canada to distract her. When land finally appeared on the horizon, everyone rushed to the deck. Anna pressed against the railing, Thomas beside her, staring at the coastline of Canada. It looked vast and empty, and somehow more real than any place she'd ever imagined. "That's home," Thomas said. "That's home," Anna agreed. They docked in Halifax. The disembarkation process was chaotic, full of paperwork and inspections and bureaucracy, but finally they were through, standing on Canadian soil, beginning their Canadian life. The journey to Manitoba took 3 days by train. Anna watched the landscape change through the window. Forests gave way to farmland. Farmland gave way to prairie. The prairie went on forever, flat and endless, making the Dutch countryside look cramped by comparison. Thomas's family met them at the station. His mother cried when she saw him. His father shook his hand with quiet pride. His siblings crowded around, all talking at once. And then they turned to Anna. For a moment nobody spoke. Anna stood there, exhausted and terrified, and so far from home she couldn't calculate the distance. These people were her family now. Thomas's mother stepped forward and took Anna's hands. "Welcome, daughter," she said in careful English. Anna burst into tears. Life on the reserve was harder than Anna had imagined. The poverty was shocking, the government neglect obvious and cruel. The winter was brutal, colder than anything she'd experienced in the Netherlands. The language barrier was constant. But Anna had survived the hunger winter, had survived occupation and starvation and propaganda designed to make her hate the very people who saved her. She could survive this too. Thomas got work in construction. Anna found work at a local bakery, her Dutch baking skills translating surprisingly well. They saved money slowly, built a life piece by piece, dealt with prejudice when they encountered it, which was often but kept going because what else was there to do? Anna wrote to her mother every week, as promised, long letters describing her new life, the endless sky, the bitter cold, the kindness of Thomas's family, the strangeness of being surrounded by a language she was still learning. Her mother wrote back with news from the Netherlands. The country was rebuilding, and every May, the Netherlands sent tulips to Canada. 20,000 tulips to say thank you for the liberation. Anna planted tulips in her garden, around the small house she and Thomas eventually bought. Red ones like the Canadian flag, yellow ones like the Dutch royal family. They bloomed every spring, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd survived. She had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. She taught them Dutch and made them Dutch treats and told them stories about the war, though never the worst parts. She wanted them to know their heritage without carrying the full weight of that history. Thomas taught them Cree, taught them to be proud of both sides of their heritage, taught them that they came from survivors, taught them that kindness matters, especially when the world tells you to be hard. Years passed, decades. Anna grew old in her Canadian home, watching her children grow and have children of their own. She watched the world change, watched Canada change, sometimes for better, sometimes not. She never forgot the fear, the propaganda posters, the terror she'd felt watching the Canadian convoy enter Apple Dawn, the chocolate bar that changed everything, the soldier who'd been kind when he could have been cruel. Thomas died first, heart attack at 72. Anna mourned him but also celebrated him. They'd had 47 years together, 47 years, built on a foundation of chocolate and kindness and a dance in a liberated city. She lived another decade without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried Dutch and Cree and Canadian blood all mixed together. On her 85th birthday, her granddaughter asked about the war, about how she'd met Thomas, about why she'd left everything to come to Canada. "Were you scared?" her granddaughter asked. "Terrified," Anna said honestly. "The most scared I've ever been. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," Anna agreed, "because sometimes the things that scare you most are the things that save you." She died in her sleep at 87, in the house she'd shared with Thomas, surrounded by tulips she'd planted and family she'd created. Back in the Netherlands, in the city of Apeldoorn, there's a memorial to the Canadian liberators. Every year on Liberation Day, people gather to remember, to lay flowers, to tell stories about the soldiers who brought food and freedom and, for some, love that crossed oceans. The propaganda posters are in a museum now, behind glass, labeled as examples of Nazi misinformation. School children visit and shake their heads at how anyone could have believed such lies. But Anna would have told them, if she were still alive, that lies are powerful when you're desperate and afraid. That propaganda works because it tells you what you already fear. That the cure for lies is truth, and sometimes truth comes in the form of a chocolate bar offered by gentle hands. Every spring, the Netherlands still sends tulips to Ottawa. 20,000 of them planted in front of Parliament, a living reminder of liberation and gratitude. The war brides are mostly gone now, but their families remain. Canadian families with Dutch names and Dutch traditions mixed with Cree and Scottish and Italian and French. Families that exist because someone chose kindness, because someone offered chocolate, because someone looked past propaganda and saw a person. Dutch women expected monsters. They found humans, and some of them found love. The Germans called the Canadians stormtroopers. They feared their effectiveness in battle. They warned their civilians about the monsters in Canadian uniforms, especially the First Nations soldiers who fought with deadly skill. But the Germans got one thing catastrophically wrong. The thing that made the Canadians truly dangerous wasn't their ability to destroy. It was their refusal to become the monsters the propaganda said they were. That's what defeated the lies, not arguments or counter-messaging, just ordinary kindness. Chocolate bars and shared rations and soldiers who saw terrified civilians and chose gentleness. The war ended. The occupation ended. The propaganda was revealed as lies. But the kindness remained, turned into friendships, romances, families, tulips sent across an ocean every spring, stories told to grandchildren, a legacy that outlasted all the hatred. Anna expected monsters. She found a husband. But more than that, she found proof that humans can choose who they want to be, that lies eventually crumble in the face of truth, that the stories designed to divide us are always weaker than the connections we build despite them. The tulips bloom every spring in Ottawa, red and yellow against green grass. Most people don't know the full story, but the tulips remember. And as long as someone remembers, the story lives. The truth persists. The lies lose. Love wins. Not always, not easily, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change the world. One chocolate bar at a time.